Historian Nathaniel Philbrick writes that by 1876, George Custer might fancy himself America's premier Indian fighter, but it was George Crook who had achieved the actual results. Philbrick continues, Crook had spent the last few years in the Southwest hunting the Apache. He'd been so successful that it had been Crook, not Custer, who'd been elevated 2 grades from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general. Crook was the one who had pioneered the technique of using pack mules instead of wagons to transport his regiment's supplies, the technique the 7th Cavalry was now belatedly learning. Traveling light and fast, he had gained a reputation for relentless pursuit. Crook's success in Arizona led to his transfer in 1875 to the Department of the Platte, where he faced the Sioux and Cheyenne during the Great Sioux War. The U.S. Army launched a 3-pronged campaign to subdue the hostile tribes. General George Crook led one column from Fort Fetterman in Wyoming Territory. His force of approximately 1,300 men included 10 companies of the 3rd Cavalry, 5 companies of the 2nd Cavalry, and infantry units, bolstered by 262 Crow and Shoshone scouts, who were traditional enemies of the Sioux and Cheyenne. Crook's mission was to locate and engage the Indian bands refusing to return to reservations. They were believed to be encamped along the Powder, Tongue, or Rosebud rivers. On the morning of June 17, 1876, Crook's column, advancing north along Rosebud Creek, paused for breakfast near the creek's headwaters. Unbeknownst to Crook, a large force of approximately 1,500 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, led primarily by Crazy Horse, had detected his approach. The native warriors launched a surprise attack around 8:30 a.m., catching Crook's forces off guard. Fortunately for Crook, his Crow and Shoshone scouts were able to hold the enemy back long enough for Crook to deploy his forces. The battle devolved into a series of intense skirmishes over a 3-mile area, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Crook deployed his infantry to hold key high ground, while his cavalry attempted flanking maneuvers. Crook's Crow and Shoshone scouts proved invaluable, countering Lakota and Cheyenne hit-and-run assaults with their own hit-and-run tactics. Crazy Horse's warriors, armed with repeating rifles and bows, used the landscape to their advantage, maintaining pressure through coordinated charges and feigned retreats. Crook attempted to seize the initiative by ordering charges to secure high ground, notably a ridge later called Crook's Hill where he established his headquarters. However, the native forces maintained pressure, targeting isolated units and forcing Crook to redeploy his troops repeatedly. The fighting was intense, with accounts describing warriors riding close to U.S. lines, taunting soldiers and drawing fire to expose weaknesses. Captain Anson Mills reported, "The Indians were the best cavalry soldiers on earth. In charging up toward us, they exposed little of their person, hanging on with one arm around the neck and one leg over the horse, firing and lancing from underneath the horses' necks, so that there was no part of the Indian at which we could aim." The Cheyenne warrior Buffalo Calf Road woman distinguished herself when she charged into heavy gunfire to rescue her brother whose horse had been killed under him. The Cheyenne called the Battle of Rosebud, the fight where the girl saved her brother. Casualties were relatively light by the end of the fight. Crook reported 28 killed and 56 wounded. Estimates of native casualties range from 10 to 100 killed or wounded. Both sides claimed victory, Crook for holding the field, and the Lakota and Cheyenne for repelling the army's advance. Now, low on ammunition, Crook withdrew to his supply base at Goose Creek, in Wyoming, effectively removing his column from the campaign for several weeks. This retreat allowed the Lakota and Cheyenne to concentrate their forces against the other U.S. columns, setting the stage for their victory at Little Bighorn on June 25, where Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and over 260 men of the 7th Cavalry perished.